Hello and thank you for buying Henson's Flying Machine's Stearman Model 75. This kit comes on 6 sheets of laser cut balsa wood. It includes plywood laser cut parts for strengthening, 3D printed parts, as well as all of the tissue covering and rigging string that you'll need. To assemble this kit you will need the following tools: a scalpel or Stanley knife, any fixed straight edge that you can get a 90-degree angle from, a sanding block or nail file. A nail file works particularly well, and either balsa cement or super glue. I'm using super glue because it's quick dry. You can either follow this video instruction or use the printed instructions. To identify each part within the sheet, use the parts list provided. Each part is numbered on the sheet and corresponds to the relevant part name. What you can do now is mark each piece with pencil onto the part on the sheet before removing it from the sheet. To begin removing the parts from the sheet, use a sharp blade, and as you'll see, the small tabs that are left in to hold the wood into the sheet, just cut those very gently to release the parts from the sheet. Now the first parts you're going to start with on this one are parts 1A and 1B, the sides of the fuselage. And then just trim very gently along all of the tabs to remove these totally from the sheet. You'll also note that there are several internal parts that are to be removed. These are weight reduction parts, and you should trim these out as well. Now, be very gentle removing the pieces from the sheet. Just bear in mind that you don't want to crack the actual balsa. That's part 1A free, and then we'll remove some of the internal parts. Some of the internal parts also contain parts that you're going to use later in the design. So just put those to one side and make sure you don't lose them. There you are, that is your completely removed part 1A. Now I'll remove part 1B, the other side of the fuselage, and then we'll look at some of the cross formers. For the first stage of the build, we're going to use parts 1A, 1B, fuselage sides, 2A, which is a plywood stabilizer separate to the sheet, 3A, which is the cockpit separator, and 5A, which is the nose former. So what we'll do is we'll start with part 3A with the first fuselage side sat flat, and we're going to put that tab end just gently into there, running along, and then we're going to use our 90-degree shape just to make sure that it's at 90 degrees to the aircraft itself and straight. We're just going to glue it all the way along the seam there just to keep it in place. That's going to form the separator between the instructor's cockpit and the student cockpit, as this is a two-seater trainer aircraft. Right, with that drying in place, let it sit for a minute and then we can move on to part 2A. The next part to install is 2A, which is the plywood former. This goes into this slot here with the corresponding slot above, and just put that arm through the bottom there and just pop it into there. One thing to make sure of, as you can see the mistake I'm making there, is that the dials are on the wrong side, so you just want to pop that into the right side and make sure that the instruments match up, and then of course just align that again just to make sure it's at 90 degrees, and then glue along the top there where it goes into the tab, and also where that arm passes through the side of the fuselage there. A healthy dose of glue on the inside out of the way so it's not seen, and then dry that in place. There we go. With that former in place, we can fit the second half of the fuselage, which is on B, and that goes on, slot it over the arm of 2A. Just let that slide down gently into there, press it in. It might be a slightly tight fit, you can trim it or you can just support it as you put it in, and then make sure that these tabs line up and push into exactly the same place on both sides of the fuselage. Make sure that it's seated correctly as well. And always be very careful pressing balsa together because you don't want to snap the main sections of the fuselage. With that in place, I'm going to glue along the inside seam there, like so. Then I'm going to just check the fitment there, press that in as I want it, give it a little bit of a trim to fit, and then scoop that part down. There we go, and that fits in there very nicely. Now I'm just going to glue along those top edges there and wait for it to dry. With those two parts in place and the fuselage sides fitted, we can now fit 5A, which is the nose support. Now you'll see the cutouts in the front of parts 1A and 1B and the tabs here. Now just lay that in there like so that the tabs slot perfectly into those holes, and then press it in place. A nice good fitting. You'll see the curvature will come just in line there. Make sure that they're down flush. Then on the inside of the model, just glue all the way along the seam. Now you want a really good strong bond on there, just to get that properly lined up. Now you're not actually going to see this because your 3D printed radial engine will fit over the end of this, but it will form the supports of everything that's coming in now. The next part to fit in is the cockpit floor, which actually fits forward of the cockpit here, just forward of part 2A. Now you want to keep it aligned to the bottom of these two outcuts here on both sides. Now if you hold that in place there and just gently taper the fuselage together, it should press onto both sides without any issues whatsoever. Then just on the inside, gently glue it in place, and it'll help you align the fuselage. It'll also add strengthening, and when the bottom formers go in, it'll strengthen the whole thing up. There we go. The next part to put in is part 4A, which is a cockpit rear section, which goes just here at the start of the taper of the cockpit. Now slide that into the two tab slots here, like so, just there, and on the other side, and just gently pinch the fuselage together. Well, you'll see how that is sat, just like so. Now make sure that these tabs are all the way down on both sides, and that there are no bends or creases in the fuselage. And then holding it in the middle, just glue into the tabs. Just like so. Hold until dry. The next part is part 8A, which is the rear tail former. This fits similar to the forward part, but from the bottom, slotting into the tabs like so. Press the tail together very gently. Now, you'll notice that the tail has started to taper. You want to make sure that it is tapering the same amount on both sides, because as you can see, there is some flex. So just align them by sight, get them as close as you can, sitting flush, and then glue both sides at the same time. Just a little touch there, pinching the fuselage together and letting it dry fully before moving on. The next part to fit is one of the plywood braces. Now there are three of these, two for the top wing and one for the lower wing. This fits just forward of part 2A, which is the ply support loop, and goes into these tabs here like so, with the cutouts facing downwards, and you'll be able to align it like that into the fuselage to give you the right depth and length. So place that in just like so for your alignment, and then glue where the tabs connect. Just like so. And like so. Making sure that these are flush with the bottom of the fuselage, because the wings will attach here, and these are going to give it a little bit of strength where the wing joins onto the fuselage. Right, the next parts to fit in are 7, A, B and C, which are the fuselage top formers, although one of them is also a bottom former. These slot here into the last slots here, and just place it into these cutouts very gently, and just pinch the fuselage together ever so slightly and glue into place. These are going to support the stringers over the top of the fuselage. The next one fits just at the rear of the instructor cockpit and into these slightly angled slats here. And again, in exactly the same way, just slot them directly down into the cutout slots and just pinch it so that they are in. Now, this is a very delicate part of the kit, so just be careful, and then glue them into place just on the inside there. Try not to get too much glue on this outside edge, because as we're going to make the curvature, you're just going to sand away that sharp edge very gently. The next part, 7C, fits into the lower bottom of here, just rear of 5A, and sits like so. Glue directly into the tabs and just held together until. With the fuselage coming together, now is a good time to do a little gentle sanding on it if you are going to cover and prepare the aircraft. Now, you can either use a nail file, which is perfect for this job, or a little sanding block like this, or even just a small cutout square of sandpaper. Now, the only places you're going to want to sand is these very top edges where the covering material is going to go over. Now, support all of the balsa wood fully, and then just very gently sand with the grain to take off that sharp edge from the balsa. Now remember, you don't have to do this, it's only if you're going to build a display model or want it really perfect. Now just gently ease it away. As you can see, it's just coming off in a fine layer of dust. You can also do these edges here, which is going to take away and reduce some of these edge parts here. I'm just going to do that there next to that separator in the cockpit to reduce it down. That's just so that when you put the tissue covering on, a lot of the blemishes of wood and that will be hidden. If you want to go to the absolute extreme, you can of course sand all of the edges to get rid of the burn marks, but I quite like the way it shows through. The tissue in this kit is blue for the fuselage, although you can use the yellow or whichever colour you like. So any fuselage is going to be fairly hidden underneath the darker blue anyway. But I do like to take these edges off just so that that covering material is going to look better as it goes through. So you can see you've got a bit of a smooth edge there, so that when the tissue lays over, it will line up quite nicely. And just scouring along very gently, making sure that you don't catch the wood or pull it, trying to go with the grain as much as possible rather than put the wood under duress, and just curve it round towards the formers of the fuselage. Let's see on the tail section there, I'm just going to support it as I go through because I don't want to snap the balsa wood. It's very delicate when it's unsupported. And then just turn that edge. Then when I'm bringing it across there, it's going to be nice and smooth, as you can see. Also reduces the chance of the tissue paper tearing as it's wet, and just helps you finish off any nice edges. See, along there, just pulled off some of that there, and you've got a nicer curvature there. Make sure that you don't take off any detail like these little tabs here which hold the lower wing rear in place. There's no need to sand any of these internal parts, as they're all going to be covered by the tissue and also by the side formers which give it shape. Just sand any edges that you think are going to come into contact with tissue. You can of course just totally skip this step if you want to, but I'm going to build this for display, so I'm going to do as much as I can just to make it spot on. And it's also worth noting that if you're building this to fly, at this point you can trim away some of the excess material inside, such as slicing these out, and then reducing the wing formers included later. And just the same on the nose, just so that when that tissue goes on there, you'll get rid of that sharp edge there. And you just very gently follow the curvature so that it sands in and you get a nice smooth finish on there. But take it very steady and always support your balsa wood. There we go. Now, the next section to start building is going to be the tail section, which is part 9A, 11 and 12 and 13, which is the cross section. Now, the diamond sections in here, while laser cut, are very delicate. They're to reduce weight in the tail, so just make sure not to push your finger through any of this lattice work. Start with part 11A in the bottom of the tail section and slide it into this lower cutout tab there. Just slightly ease apart the arms and push it all the way down until you see it sitting flush, which will result in the two arms protruding just slightly backwards of that tail there. Same with the upper one here, just gently slot that part in, let it slide all the way back like so. Now you'll have those two pieces there which are going to support the tail part 13A. Now I'm not gluing anything quite yet, as I want to dry fit everything together properly. Now 13A is a very delicate part, as you can see. If you pull these two parts apart, it will snap it. Now you want to slide it in above part 12A there, which is, slide it on like that, and then very gently just push it further back. You'll watch it going in underneath, and then ease it backwards as far as possible until it is in line with the part of 9A there. There you are. Now use your 90-degree edge to align 9A and 13A perfectly, and on the inside you can start gluing it. Glue it firmly down to part 12A and 12A to 9A, keeping it aligned the whole time, and that's going to make sure that your tail upright and horizontal are fitted together correctly. Now with that in place, you can do the same on the other side. Glue along like so, and then glue in 11A, the lower one, which will also be fitted into place like so. Now wait for this all to dry very securely before you start mounting it into the fuselage. Now with the tail section dry, it's time to fit it into the fuselage. Now you'll see there are little cutouts in the fuselage here to allow it to sit in. These are going to allow it to drop in like that. Now you'll see there is a cutout in the fuselage, but that does not go further than there. So that sits like that, and then the two parts here are going to squeeze together to come in contact with the supporting triangles underneath while sitting like so. So there is a degree of triangle exposed, and you're just going to glue the lower triangle into place, like so, and then the tail section can also be glued into place through the inside here. Hold that to dry, and the alignment on the top should be with these two pieces in line with there. Right. Then from the rear, just glue these small edges into place, like so. And that is the tail section in place. Hold it until it's absolutely firm and solid, and now you have the nice aligned tail all set in place. To bring the fuselage close to completion, you will need the main side formers 15A and B, and the rear of this, which is 16A and B. Then we have 17A, B, C and D, which are the lower and top formers of the same parts. So we will start with the main former, which is 15A. Now this is going to sit down in the center of this cutout here, like so. Now you want to try and align this as straight as you can across the fuselage, like so. Align it towards the middle here, and then just glue it along that bottom edge in the middle. The reason you're gluing along the bottom is just to hide the glue as it goes through. Let that set. Then apply a little bit of pressure further back until it comes into contact, and glue along that bottom edge there. You see there how that's going to create the curvature on the side of what is a very rounded fuselage of the Boeing. I'll hold that in place, let it sit down until it's glued. Now further along you have this very delicate part, which is 16A and B. Now this fits further down into this last cutout section here. You have to align this perfectly going backwards from 15A. Now you can even slot it into place and just use another strip of balsa just to align it. Once you have it in, just hold it in and glue it on the underneath there with a little touch. Once this is in place, you want to be very careful that you don't knock that little trailing section there, which is just going to bring the contour down into it. Now, but 17A, B, C and D, slot above here like so. Just pop that into that slot there, push it up against the top like so, and then glue it from the underneath here all along, and at the rear exactly the same. You'll see it butts up against that top section there, and you can put a little extra bit of glue in there just to make sure that it fits nicely. Another of the same into the bottom. Now press that down, fill that little gap with it there, and then a little touch of glue on the underside, just hold it in place all the way along. So when you come to doing your tissue covering on here, you're going to have a very nice bold shape and a rounded fuselage going backwards, which is going to give it a very distinct Stearman appearance. Then repeat exactly the same process on the other side. Make sure that they are aligned, the central parts, with one another. So you want to just double check that you're getting them in the same place. I usually aim for that little crook there. Make sure that it's straight, central at the front, glue it down from underneath, and then just taper gently inwards. B further back. Again, I'm just going to use a little piece to help me align it nicely. Just like so. I also want to make sure that it's aligned the same as on the reverse side. And then a touch of glue. Obviously using super glue it's a lot quicker, but balsa cement would be a more traditional way of building the kit. Now the front formers once again, pop them into their locations. Top and bottom, keep them flush. That may not look spot on at this point, but once you start tissuing, it will definitely give it a much more rounded shape. There we go. And now I'm just going to pop a little 3D printed radial on there to show you how much is coming together with that Stearman look. It's going to bring together there. Laying the fuselage aside for now, it is time to start assembling the lower wings, which are made of the leading edge, which is 18A, the trailing edge 19A, the detachable aileron, and type 1 and 2 wing ribs. Begin first of all by putting 18A and 18B flat on the surface together. These come on the same sheet, so you can just pretty much leave them together. Push these ends up. As you'll note, a little self-jigging jigsaw cut there, and then just run a little bit of glue along that seam just to make sure it stays together. Moving along, you'll note here, this is a very delicate support here. So just as you hold it together, allow it to ease itself together, and then just glue in there. You want to make sure that you don't accidentally glue it to your work surface, so just keep it moving, just very gently. And then moving along, same on the outer wingtip, it should self-jig together quite easily there, and then simply run the glue along, keep it moving so it's not going to glue to your table, and then allow it to dry. Next we're going to start with wing ribs. You want type 1 wing ribs, which look like this, and then just one of the type 2 wing ribs, which are slightly shorter for the wingtip. Now the reason that the aileron is supplied unattached is so that you can, if you want to convert it later to be more functional, to be micro RC, you can use paper hinges in here, or little folded cotton hinges or threaded hinges, whatever you want to use to convert it. So the first thing we're going to do is use one of the type 1 fish, and we're going to put it on this inside edge here, like so. Now we need to keep it vertical and press down into that little cutout. Align it as far forward as it will go, which should leave about 0.5 millimeter distance between the front edge, the leading edge, and the beginning of the wing rib. That's just so that you can sand the edge very slightly for flying. Now just glue these pieces all along that edge. It'll make you a nice strong butt, and also make sure that you glue down the tail of the rib there. Again, make sure you're not gluing it to your work surface. The next one you want to put in is just inside of this support beam here. Again, another type 1, press down into that slot out and align forward. Now make sure that it is firm up against this little support section here. And then once you're happy with it, make sure that it's butted up, align forward, and then just glue all the way along where it meets that little support section. Now this is going to put as much strength as possible into that support section, so be quite liberal with the glue on it, but again remember, don't glue it to your work surface, so just move it around if necessary. Moving on from there, you can now put in the type 2 wing rib, which has only one hole in it. You'll note the difference there, and that one is going to go on the outer edge of the wing there, as it's much shorter. As you'll see, the curvature of the aileron doesn't allow for the same size rib, so we're going to use a much shorter one in there, and then butt it up again, do it really securely all the way along that edge. On a very nice fitting in there, a nice strong bond with your glue. That's going to give your wingtip a lot of strength. There we go. And the rest of these all fit type 1. So simply drop them in to the slots. all the way along. Now as you go along, just align them forward, make sure that they're vertical, and glue those front edges into place. Same with the rear edge. Now, one of the common mistakes that people make when building these kits is they can accidentally build two starboard wings. So you're going to have to be very careful when you're building it that you build an exact mirror image of this wing so that you don't end up with two left wings, which would mean you'd have to strip everything down and start again on the wing section. Right, once that's in place, if you are doing a display or a free flight model, you might as well go ahead and glue the aileron in place. However, if you are going to convert later, what I would do is glue it in place, all of the wing ribs here, like so, and then just trim downwards here at an angle so that you can use these to build up some excess on the aileron itself. But as we're going for free flight, those are fixed in place, that's solid, and you can run a little glue along this edge just to fix it in place and give it strength. I'll do that here, like so. So that is one port wing done. Right. Now as we move on to the second wing, you're going to use the alternative parts 18B and 19B instead of obviously 18A and 19A. So when you're lining it up, make sure that you have a port wing and a starboard wing and that you're going to build them like that. So have one wing next to the other as a comparison and just make sure as you go along you're building them in exactly the same way. I won't show this on video, I'm going to build it exactly the same way and we'll cut forward. With the two mirrored wings completed, it's time to attach them to the fuselage. The lower wings will be supported by these two ply cross sections here. Now, taking the starboard wing, which is of course with the flat leading edge, you'll see that that section there slots into the cutout on the lower part of the fuselage there, and just but gently on the inside you'll see you can align it on the inside there, allow it to fall upwards so that it's supported by the two struts, and then glue the two support struts along that wing and let them set in place before gluing along this inside edge here. Right, hold on for a moment while that just dries. Then you want to glue all the way along this inside edge, make a very strong bond on there. Seal it in properly. Obviously if you're using balsa cement this takes a little bit longer to actually do. You can also, if you're making a flying model, simply put a little piece of paper over there to support it and allow it to glue to itself. We are going to put the main wing spar in, but much later once we've fitted the support struts for the top wing. Glue forward and back of these, and also where it meets this wing rib. If you have any space there, you can of course bolster it with a little sliver of balsa put in there to give it more strength. And once it's settled in place, it should sit at 90 degrees to the fuselage, guided by these. Now you're going to do exactly the same on the opposite side of the fuselage, holding it in place, dropping that in just into that slot there, and then comparing on the other side where it fits in. Once you've got it held in properly, keep checking so that you've got the right fit, and then glue these support struts in first. The reason you're gluing those in first is because you want those to guide where the wing is actually going to sit. And you can move on to the inside. Make sure that you've got a really nice bond all the way along, get that wing into place, and then hold it until it is totally dry. With the wings firmly attached to the fuselage, it's time to start fitting in the fuselage stringers. Now, the main stringers that you're going to use for the fuselage are these ones here. Now, you need to cut all the way along the end of these, as the spaces between will act as spare stringers as well. So just very carefully slice all the way down both ends, and that will give you a whole series of stringers which should then just pop free like so. And you can break those apart just with your fingers very gently like that. Obviously discard the one that's too big. There we go. Now these strings, we're going to start on the rear of the fuselage. You'll see where the curvature at the back of the cockpit is. Now you can lay these from the beginning of part 9A, the tail section, further forward, and just gently work it into the tab on the top of the fuselage formers. Now once that's in place, just press it down firmly into place. Start by gluing it to that tail section 9A as aligned as you possibly can, and then just moving forward, just dab a little bit of glue into that tab and then drop it into place like so, and just press it down so that you're getting a nice fit that's flush with the top there, because if it's not flush you're going to have to sand it a little bit, and stringers can be incredibly delicate. So now you've got that central one in place. Moving along, move this one further back and you can actually start the beginning of the stringer right here, and it'll touch up to this tail section there. So with this particular one, start front, the part 7C, which holds into there, and just drop it in, hold it in place, and then press down behind it so that it hits that form shape there. Then we're going to glue into the top of the next slot along, and the next slot along, and then we're going to drop it in and just apply a little bit of pressure, just hold it in place in the correct way. And then on the tail, you can of course trim that so it fits flush, but I'm going to leave it slightly raised and just glue it to that tail section there. Just apply a little bit of pressure to hold it in place. Now don't forget that the stringers are incredibly delicate, so you want to be very gentle in doing this job. Exactly the same process on the other side, starting with it aligned to the front. I'm going to glue into that slot there, and I'm going to drop all the way along. Pop that part into there, and then push down until you get it. Make sure it's aligned at the very tip of the tail there, and it should settle quite nicely. And just hold that until it's dry. The only part that keeps popping up is this little tail at the back, and then I'm going to run a little bit of sanding paper over it just to make sure that it all fits perfectly. Alright, with that in place, I'm going to use the blade here. I'm just going to very gently, with the blade flat against part 7, just trim in a sawing motion to remove that so that you've got a flat edge there. That's the back of that rear cockpit. Now you can of course, if you wanted to make this a single seater, extend these stringers forward, closing up the rear cockpit, or extend the front stringers backwards, closing up the front cockpit. As this is going to be the traditional two-seater model, I'm going to move on to the front, and starting at the front of the student's cockpit there, I'm going to pop that little stringer into there, and then move forward. I'm going to glue it in place first, with a touch of glue in the top middle of that former, the one further along, and then eventually all the way into 5A, which is the very front there. Now, I'm going to align this into there so it's flush, and then I'm going to press it down all the way to the front, making sure that it's as settled into there as possible so that I get as nice a finish as possible. I'm going to do the same on each side. I've already dry fitted these, but I recommend you dry fitting before fitting any part, just to make sure that it's going exactly where you want it to be. So I know that that's sitting flush in there, and the curvature up there is going quite nicely. I'll carry on the other side. You'll notice with the stringers that there are slight variances in stringers. That's natural as they're cut from wood, so there are slight differences. Select whichever one you think fits best as you go along. Remember, this is your model at the end of the day, so build it for you. There we go. And with those fixed in place, I'm going to, again, use the flat of the blade against part 5A, and then just gently peel back. I need these to be flush because the 3D printed radial motor is going to mount onto here. Then, with this part separated, you'll see how the stringers are formed up with the two cockpits separated. You can fill in these grooves if you want to. I don't think it's necessary. Now you'll see you've got that very distinctive nose shape there. I'm going to flip it over. Save the parts of the stringers that you've cut off. We're going to need those a little bit later. Now, underneath, I'm going to leave the middle one empty for now, and I'm going to go on the external one. And I'm going to glue from the front. Sorry, not from the front. I'm going to lay it into the front, move backwards, and then butt it up to this cross section here, like so. Just twist it around till it fits flush. And I'm going to hold it in place against that cross section and glue it directly to that cross member there. And a reason for that you'll see in a minute, because the stringers don't go the full way down the bottom of the fuselage. There's a central stringer, but I want them to curve all the way along the front. Now as I'm pressing down, I'm just gluing into these slots as I go. You can see the excess comes out the front just a little bit. Now I'll do the same on this side here. Again, I'm going to glue primarily buttered up this rear joint here. Like so. And I'll move along, dropping glue wherever the formers and stringers meet in these little tab slots. There we go. Now I'll let everything dry up quickly and then move on to the next step. Now the longer stringer that you'll need is, you'll notice there are a series of these long stringers which are actually your main wing spars. Now the way these are arranged on the sheet will give you 5 of them with a spare in the middle. So I'm going to use one of them as the main underbelly. So I'm just going to trim that out now. You can trim the whole section out just so that you've got them free, exactly as you did with the shorter ones. You'll notice also dotted around the sheets there are some spare stringers. This is because accidents do happen, so it's always good to have a few spare stringers around. I'm going to separate this off, just run a fingernail along that inside there. I'll lay the wing spars to the side for now, and I'm going to fit this the full length of the underside of the fuselage here. I'm going to start by lining it all the way up to that tail wheel there, dropping it into that main groove there, making sure that it fits nicely into that tail wheel notch there. I'm just going to glue it into the tail wheel notch. And I'm going to move forward, drop a little bit of glue in these formers. All the way along, and you'll notice that now it does protrude almost the same amount just beyond the end of 5A. Next task is going to be to just gently pare off these ends as you've done before, nice and flush. Make sure you don't slip and accidentally stab yourself. So we've got a nice flush end on there. You've got a very curved Stearman shape to it now. You've got the distinct cockpit separation and all of the curvature on the top. Now At this stage, what you might want to do is go along and just really gently sand the edges, just give you a really nice finish. Now, this is where I really recommend using a nail file, because it is just that much lighter and more delicate, and help you just take off those edges so that you've got such a smooth curvature to it. Also, roughing the balsa will help it to take on the tissue very well. There we go. So over that top there, I'm just going to smooth where it goes through that former, because that's a finishing former there. And then I'll give it as much curvature with as little bumps and edging as possible. I'm going to do the same on the knee. Very gentle, because unsupported balsa stringers can be difficult to play with. But again, when you come to covering, this is going to make an absolute world of difference. There you go. Now you've got a lot of nice curvature going on there. You can do that as much as you like. At this stage, you can also sand the leading edge of the wing. Now, be very careful to support the wing correctly while doing this, and just with the grain slide it along to give you a bit of curvature there. That'll make it go through the air a lot easier, and also look nicer when you've covered it. As you'll notice, there is a slight gap along that front edge where the wing ribs have a little bit of space, and you can just very gently take that off. And then that will help with your covering as well and make it really smooth and nice. And then just be very careful. You can go around all these edges here. Trailing edges, you can take a little bit more off. I'm going to lay that down and just slide it over. Make sure that you don't accidentally knock your wing ribs as you're going around. But again, how much of this you want to do is entirely up to you. It's your kit. Do whatever feels right. There we go. Now I'm confident that when that's covered, that's going to go on quite nicely. Right, with the top and bottom stringers in place, you now need to fit the side stringers. You should have one or two of these left. So we're going to start by dry fitting that there into the side of this central panel here. Now, it's very important that that's aligned absolutely straight, so we'll glue it in place there, and then we're going to lay that stringer over the top and down into there. You'll be able to see how it curves back towards this section here. Now, once it's glued, we're going to just use our scalpel and very carefully cut into here. Now, be aware that this needs to be incredibly delicately done. Just use the very tip of your scalpel to pare it out, that section there, until it drops away. Now, glue into that little cutout. Bend the piece in until it sits flush, like so. And just hold it until it's dry. Again, we're going to very carefully just sand over that to give it a nice continuous straight line over that top edge all the way along. That's going to give us a little bit of bulge in the fuselage, help that taper and that shape come back. Now with the remainder of it, we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. And we'll glue and then using the alignment, just pop that in, hold it where you want it, let it glue, and then once again I'm going to try and tease that away. One way to do it is to put your finger through and just support it like that when you are cutting, and then just ever so gently slice away the excess stringer. Pop it in line and then glue in place. Now that is probably the most delicate part of the entire build. So just be very careful, be sure you know your own limitations and that you're comfortable doing it as it slides in. And try not to rush it. There you are. There you have a lovely fuselage that's going to be curved the whole way along, and it'll look distinctly Stearman when it comes together. There we go. Okay, with all of the stringers in place, it's time to leave the main part of the model aside for now, and we will start on the wing sections for the top plane. Now, we're going to build the outer sections of the wing first, which are parts 21A and 22A. 21A being the leading, 22 being the trailing. Now, in exactly the same way as we did for the lower wings, we're going to use the self-jigging parts, allow it to guide itself together, and then just glue all the way along the seam. Now, as with the lower wing, make sure that you're not gluing it to your work surface. This is really easy to do. I've done it 100 times and I really need to stop. Now, it being self-jigging, you can't really get it wrong. Just press all the parts up together and they will align themselves, like so. Now let that set properly before moving on. We're going to use wing types 1 and wing type 2 again. There is a third type, and that's going to come into play when we're building the centre of the wing, so we'll leave that aside for now. We have a single type 2. Now, this is the one with only one hole in it. We're going to put that towards the wing tip. Now, we're going to lay it down and then slot it in, and of course align it forward as we have with all of the other wing ribs. And we're going to just glue all the way along that edge, nice and firm. That's going to give it a lot of strength. Remember, if you are flying it and the aircraft does come down, you're likely to touch a wingtip. Put as much strength in there as possible, make sure it's upright, and we can carry on with all of the other type 1 wing ribs. Now the only one you really need to pay attention with is the one that comes in line with this little support here. Now place that in, butt it up against it, make sure that that's well connected there, and then glue the whole way along, because this support is going to be for the struts, and you want the struts to be very strong, of course, because they're supporting the weight of the entire top wing, so you really need to make sure that's a good bond on there to support that. Now with the rest of the type 1s, just align them forward, make sure that they're upright, touch them back and forwards with glue, and lay them in the whole way along. And don't forget you're working from the outside of the wing inwards. Like so. Awesome. Now again, with the inner one here, you're going to want to butt it up against there, give it as much strength as possible, and glue it firmly to the rest of the wing. That will really add a lot of tactile strength into that wing. Like so. They're all down, they're all firm. As you can see on the bottom, they're all sat flush as they come out. So you've got a fairly strong, well-shaped wing there. Now, now I know ailerons in the top wing of a Stearman. You can start sanding this if you want to sand it. So you can sand it all the way along. Just pare off that little edge there, round it off a little bit. And that front edge you can do the same. Just make sure that you are not creating any false davits or anything the whole way along. And just get a nice curvature to it. Again, it's not really necessary, but it's just a nice extra touch to do if you want to. Just make sure that your sanding block doesn't catch and break any of the ribs as you're going along. So that is one side done. Now you're going to take the same parts and build the mirrored wing. So lay it down, making sure that you are mirroring it, butt it up, of course, and then build it in exactly the same way. I'll do that off camera just to save time. With both mirrored wings now finished, the next part to do is the center connect for the top wing, which as you can see is going to fit into there and form across. For this there are 2 ply formers. These are the cloth strengtheners which will fit in like such, and you also have the type 3 wing ribs. Now you want to lay these formers across here like so. They're going to be held in place by the type 3 wing ribs, which are going to drop over the top there. It should be fairly loose so you can line it all up. Once you've got those in, it should be solid now. Put that in place, bunch up with your other wing, and you're going to let it all jig itself together because you'll have some small alignment changes, as some of these are slightly shorter and longer, and let that sit kind of equidistant on both sides. And now holding it in place firmly down, I want you to glue just the wing ribs. Now remember to align them forward as far as possible, and then glue just the wing ribs to that center part there, like so. Hold the wing ribs down so that they climb firmly into place. Let them glue, and then you can adjust these cross members to be perfectly straight. Then glue the cross members down to the center part and to the wing on each side. Press it down so that it's firm, and glue all the way along on both sides. You want a really strong bond here because this is going to support a lot of that wing strength, especially in flight. Yeah. Right, I'm going to let that dry off for a second before continuing. Right, with the glue set, now I want you to glue all the way along the seam here where the sections of wings jig together. Now there's no way you can get this wrong because the front and the back are different to each other. So the curved part will only fit into the curved part, and it'll align that front end for you perfectly. Just a little extra glue over the top of the center wing ribs just to properly strengthen them in there, and then just check that you've got a nice firm bond all the way. You can put a little bit more glue on underneath into these holes. That'll help strengthen it even more. There you are, and there you have a fairly solid single piece wing. And you don't need any jigs or anything, everything's all self-jigging, and you've got quite a bit of strength in that with an amount to twist to take up any shocks. So if you now wanted to sand this, I would suggest sanding just along that front edge there, get it all nicely aligned, put any curvature you want in there. Obviously don't go too extreme, just gently bare everything off so that you've got a nice edge. And then on that trailing edge you can of course just bring it down nice and smooth so that you've got almost a knife edge on there. Now the last part for the wings are these little curves here, which you'll see are wingtip parts. Now the fitment of these is fairly open because you're going to use one on each wingtip, and they fit on the wingtip just like that. I prefer to fit them straight across like that to give you a little bit of gap on there, or you could put them forward at that kind of angle there. I'm just going to go straight off from the centre of there, heading forwards towards that wingtip. The reason behind these is just to give you a bit more shape when you are covering. It'll help build up the shape there and stretch the covering out a little bit more. We'll do that on both sides. There are of course ones for the bottom wings as well, which I'll do in a second. And glue that in place. There we go. Now, with that wing pretty much together, we're going to put the main wing spars on it. Now, we'll piece these off, make sure they're nice and smooth. Now, we're going to lay that starting on that inside edge there so it connects with the Type 3 wing rib. Now, we're going to lift it so that it aligns into that top section there. Now, you could just simply hold it up to the right alignment level there, make sure it's butted up fairly firm, and glue that in place. And going along, you want to glue each one to the very top of every wing rib. Now there is enough wiggle room in here for them to fall down further, but obviously you want them to be aligned perfect to the top for the best possible covering. Now if you don't get this perfect, it doesn't really matter, you can always sand it down a little bit. It is at the end of the day a kit you are building for yourself, so have fun with it and don't beat yourself up. Once you've got it through the end of that wing rib there, just put a little nick in it with your blade and snap it off, and then that's clear on one side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just peel that off, make sure that it's nice and clean, and then slide it in, butt it up to that centre section, as close to the top as possible, and just lift it up to fit flush. And then as you go along, just raise it to be perfectly in line with each wing rib, or push down as necessary. Yeah. Now, once again, just a little nick, pack it off. If you wanted to, you could use some of the spares for filling in, but I'm not sure it's really necessary. And then you have your completed top wing plane. On the main assembled model, we will now put in these little wingtip edges, which we'll just tear out of there. And in exactly the same way, just glue them in a manner that you think is going to make a nice curvature. On these I prefer to go just forward of that line there and into there like so. That'll give you a flattish area here and a nice curved front. Just make sure that they're the same on both sides so it doesn't look a little strange. There you go. And now in a minute we will look at fitting the top wing and the tail feathers. One thing to note is if you are covering this aircraft, now is a good time to cover the top wing as it's completely separate, and the lower wing we can do after we've got the wing struts in place. The first thing to build for the wing struts is these two pieces here. Now you'll see that these jig together very easily. Just slot all the parts together and they will self-jig and hold together. Once you've got them, just make sure that they're flat against each other. Do top, bottom, and of course that middle V. As you can see, the top and the bottom of each one is different. That's because there is a different peg in top and bottom, and they will fit in with the alignment of the wing and make the wing sit flush. Now this will take longer to glue because the plywood takes longer to glue. So I'll make this one and the next one, and then we'll jump back in and fit them. Now with the struts built, it's time to fit them. You'll see that the curvature at the front fits with the fuselage, and you'll see the cutout here in the wing ribs. Now they will drop straight in like so. You can press them down as hard as you like, and then we're going to glue them along that inside edge there. We just need to make sure that they are vertical. So again, we'll go back to our old straight edge. Just make sure that they are vertical across those wing ribs there. Like so. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Pop that into that slot there. Press it down nice and firmly. Come in with the 90 degree. And then glue it all the way along. Nice strong bond on that edge there. Make sure it's tamped down properly. That's settled. Now they have to be set totally before you can start attaching the top wing. The lower wing spars can be fitted now. Now these need to be cut in two pieces, so you're going to do the inside one first. Now you'll go the full way along here, all the way up to that edge, and you will measure it to just inside edge of the strut support, and then trim it. Then what you're going to do is just lay that into the top of the wing ribs, butt it right up against that fuselage, into there, a nice fitting. It should be firm the whole way along, and then align it, of course, all the way to the top. Drop it into the glue it on both heads, glue it to the strut, set it down nice and neat. You want to glue it all the way to everyone very strongly, and to the actual fuselage of the aircraft. And if you see here, the cross member, the original part 2A, will be in contact with it, and you can glue it to that as well for added extra strength. So now you've got a strong wing which is built up to support that strut. Moving on, get the remainder of your wing spar, thread it through the top there, glue it first of all to the outside of that strut line there and into that top hole there. Get it aligned nicely, pop it into place, and then it's set to glue. And we'll move along nice and firm. Everything's set. Now, as with the top wing, put a small nick in and just break it off. There you are. Now we'll do exactly the same on the starboard wing here. We'll fit that in nice and firm, get a good length to it. Trim it where we want it. Then push fit it the whole way along, line to the top of the rib so you don't get any indentation. Let's screw it first of all to the strut support, and moving along, nice firm fits the whole way. Press down into here. Like so. Now once that's dry, you'll have quite a strong wingtip end on there. I'll use another bit and carry on here, clamp down into there. Good strong bonds where it meets the struts, and onto there. And once again, trimmed off. And that gives you the completed lower wing. Right, with the bottom wing done, what we're going to do is trial fit the top wing now. Now at this point you want to cover the aircraft if you're going to cover it. It'll be much more difficult with the top wing in place. So you'll see here the double cutout shape. That's going to drop into the double cutout on top of the wing struts. Now align them correctly and just gently press them in. You want to be very gentle as you press them in. They are going to arc slightly outwards. That's because you want them under tension. Now try and support them from the back as you push them down, and they will pop perfectly into there. Now that has the top wing mounted. However, you're going to need the center struts from the side of the cockpit in order to support it. Now these will fit into those tiny little notches there. You see the notch there? That fits into there like so, and then into these two top notches here. So what we'll do is we'll lay that into the top notches and then just gently drop it into there, align it flat, and then we're going to glue the bottom only. So we'll glue that bottom section in just so that it holds it in place. I'll do that as well on the opposing side. We'll start with the top, get those two slots in place, and then put that bottom notch into the corresponding slot like so, and glue it along. Remember, you should have already covered the aircraft at this stage if you're going to. There you go, and now you have very solid top wing. When you do glue it in place, you're going to glue here and here all the way along the inside of these struts, so that that very firmly is going to glue onto there and here, and you're going to end up with a very strong biplane model. So if we glue along these seams and along the top struts here and the inside here and the outer, what we're going to end up with is a very firm biplane that's all pegged together just right. Now, a few finishing details. Right, when it comes to fitting the tail control surfaces, you have the rudder upright and the tail horizontal planes. Now, the rudder upright can be made to hinge, so what I would do is gently sand the inside of each side of it here, and then use paper hinges to fit it just right. That will allow it to turn. Now, as this is going to be just a pre-flight model, I'm just going to glue it in place. I'm going to add that in there like that. It should sit held just gently by the little bottom parts, and then I'm going to glue all the way along the seams. You can, of course, align it so that your aircraft will circle very gently, but I don't want to, so I'm going to keep it utterly straight. And just pop it into place like so, and you'll see it's now looking a lot more distinctively Stearman with that tail section. The same can be said for the tail horizontals. Now these could be made to hinge. You can quite simply make little paper hinges for these, or some people like to make thread hinges. It depends how far you want to go with the model. I just want to glue it together. I'm not doing anything too dramatic with this one, so I'm just going to glue them in. You can, of course, adjust these for the angle of flight you want, but that's going to involve balancing once you've got the aircraft together. You want to know how it handles. You should also have already pre-covered these. You can get to the stage and cover them later, but it'll look a lot nicer if you've pre-covered these so that you can get a very distinct line between the two surfaces. And there you go. That gives a very distinct Stearman shape and finishes off the tail section of the aircraft you'll see there. We have just a little bit of more detail on the front and the landing gear to build up, as well as the radial to put on, and we're almost there. So the radial is this little 3D printed part, which is going to fit on the front here. And you're going to want to line the centre part with the inside hole on there. Make sure that it is centred onto that hole, exactly where you want it, and then just glue around. It's a good idea to paint behind it, or of course tissue behind it when you're ready. The other thing to note as well is if you are tissuing it, you're going to have to leave a little bit of space underneath for you to, using a pair of tweezers, fit the rubber. Now to fit the rubber inside the kit, you will find a matchstick which should go behind this section here. Around your matchstick, loop your rubber, and then through your cotter pin, and then using some tweezers underneath, you want to pass the front of your cotter pin through the centre hole in the radial engine, and then through your propeller, and fold the sides over, and that will allow it to spin freely. There are included in the kits these little side panels here, which are extra details on the side of your radial engine. Now, these are optional. You don't have to include them if you want them to be freestanding on the radial. Can help a little bit with shaping. Some people like to colour them. They just sit there behind the radial, like so. I'm going to leave them out for this kit, but that is where they should go. Now your landing gear consists of these parts here. Right, you will cut out. There is a hole for the spline to fit onto that, onto your little part. And these are very simply going to push into this cutout section on the bottom. Now put your front edge in and then push in. It's quite a tight fit, like so. Front edge in, push in. Now the most important thing now is you have to align these slightly outwards before you glue them, but they have to be the same on each side. They're getting fitted like so, and then they should fit exactly like so. And now your aircraft looks very much like a Stearman. Rigging, once you've covered everything and glued it together, is done using these hole-in-the struts, and it'll allow you to fully rig the entire aircraft with the thread provided, and it'll look quite professional. There will be the instrument panel cutouts on the inside, and you can also rig from these landing gear once you've got them in place and glued firmly. I'm not gluing them yet because I'm still going to cover this model as a display unit, and then you can rig from these points here further back into the fuselage and get a very nice appearance to it. There you are, and that is your completed Stearman Model 75. Thank you very much for buying Henson's Hobbies, and follow our channel.